Welcome to Diagnosing Dx, the podcast giving diagnostics the platform it deserves. While therapeutics and devices often take centre stage, diagnostics is the engine driving precision medicine. I'm your host, David Philby, and each week we spotlight the innovators, breakthroughs, and real-world challenges shaping the future of DX. In this episode of Diagnosing Dx, I'm joined by Kaylene Ready, Chief Product Officer at Juniper Genomics, a company rewriting the future of IVF through whole genome embryo testing. We talk about how Juniper is turning a 50% coin flip success rate into real certainty for families, the emotional and financial toll of fertility treatment, and what it takes to bring true innovation into one of medicine's most personal journeys. Welcome, Kayleen. Excited to have you on the show this week. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, good. Where in the world are you?
I live just outside of Houston, Texas.
Just come off the back of a hot summer, I assume?
Oh, we're still in hot summer.
Still in it. Good to know. We have actually, I'm actually excited because obviously Juniper are doing some really exciting stuff in a really exciting space, and I'm really excited to hear where the current state of play is in IVF and what you guys are going to do to improve it. It's a really nice topic, I think, to talk about. So excited to get into it. But before we do that, it's really good if we can hear about you, who you are, your background, and what you've been doing.
Yeah, so I'm Kayleen. I am the Chief Product Officer at Juniper Genomics, and I am formally trained as a genetic counselor. If you're not familiar with what is a genetic counselor? Genetic counselors have special training in, surprise, medical genetics and counseling. And so usually a genetic counselor's job is to meet with patients in a clinic and help them understand what might be happening or running in their family that could be genetic, and whether or not they want genetic testing, what those results might mean for them, their family, their treatment. But I had the opportunity many, many years ago to leave the clinic and join a startup. And I fell in love with working at startups and really being on the cutting edge of technology and being able to bring that technology into the clinic faster. And I just didn't have the opportunity to do that when I was, in the middle of seeing patients every day.
Wow, that's super interesting. So I guess first to clarify, when you're a genetic counselor, is there a specific field or sort of, modality or purpose within it that you focused on?
Really good question. So way back when I was trained, you are trained across many, many different specialty areas. So that includes cancer genetics, cardio, pediatrics, prenatal, reproductive medicine. So a whole span of things that genetics might touch.
Interesting. And you said it sounds like you feel that you have more of an impact working in startups than you felt you had the opportunity to do in the clinic as a genetic counselor. Is that right? You feel you get more of an impact from startups?
Absolutely. Right. You every day is different. So I love it for that reason. But, when it comes to the impact itself, when you're in clinic, which is an amazing thing to do, it is an amazing and honorable thing to be in clinic and be next to somebody and help them make these decisions. But ultimately, that occupies a lot of time. And so you're not also then able to kind of push on the edges and bring new technology quickly into the clinic. The other thing about being a genetic counselor is that depending on where you work, there are physicians involved. And so sometimes, you're running up against physicians and bureaucracy and hospitals that make that difficult as well.
Yeah, interesting. So actually the chance to be at the forefront of innovation and actually change the standard of care and that sort of opportunity that you get within startups is actually having much more of a profound and almost compounded effect on people. So you feel so much more fulfilled by your work and what you're doing rather than being tied up in red tape and bureaucracy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, right, when I was in clinic, I could see so many patients in a day, so many patients in a week, a month. And that is, again, an amazing experience, and I'm happy that I had it. But where I am now, I can work with multiple clinics in a month who serve all of those same number of patients. And so, again, that impact, the compounding on the number of patients you get to see is much, much larger.
Yeah, awesome. So you entered into the startup world, and take us through that journey, what you've been doing in that side of the industry and the products you've been working on.
Yeah, so I've always sort of loved working broadly in women's health. And in fact, even before I became a genetic counselor, I worked at Planned Parenthood in college and even a little after college, and sort of loved, helping women through these types of journeys. And so that's kind of, I think, the thread that binds all of my work. The initial startup that I joined was a company called Counsel. They were very small, and their goal was to bring expanded carrier screening to the world. If you're not familiar with carrier screening and genetics, what we're worried about is, you might be perfectly fine, but if you and your partner are both carriers of a genetic disease and pass on that mutation to a child, the child might not be fine. It might have a serious genetic condition. And so it sounds crazy. It's ubiquitous now. Everybody does expanded carrier screening. But way back when
we were pregnant. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. And it's just commonplace and kind of everybody takes it for granted. But in 2011, nobody was doing that. And in fact, when I was thinking about having kids and asking my OBGYN about carrier screening, we did testing for one condition, for cystic fibrosis, and that was it.
Wow.
And it was really expensive, and, we probably didn't learn very much. So I think that's when I first got the taste of what it can mean to kind of change an industry and change how things are done. And we did a number of things there, including building an online results portal. Again, this sounds so dumb, right? Because everybody has online results portals. But at the time, nobody did that. You didn't have direct access to your own test results. You didn't have direct access to genetic counselors. So we built this whole system to make that possible. And from there, I've done a number of different things, again, mostly in women's health, ranging from remaining in kind of the reproductive space, working at telehealth genetic counseling companies, working in hereditary and somatic cancer, but really all kind of, again, focused on women's health and genetics.
Yeah, awesome. And so what are you doing now?
So at Juniper is focused on reproductive medicine and more specifically IVF. And Juniper really wants to improve the journey that is IVF by doing more genetic testing of embryos. So if we back up just a bit, Juniper is a health tech company, and we're trying to provide as much information as we can to patients and to clinicians about the genetics of the embryos that they're making in the IVF process, so that they can decide which embryos to transfer and which ones will be most successful at resulting in a pregnancy and live birth.
Wow. So I really want to get into this, but before that, what's your role within Juniper?
Yep. So I'm the chief product officer, but we are a startup. So that is a really big fancy title for saying I wear a lot of hats. At the end of the day, the job is essentially how do we go from a really good idea to good patient care? And I just jump in wherever I can to make that happen, and to kind of create fast learning cycles, try to de-risk the test itself and the kind of workflow around it, and then iterate and listen to clinicians and try to do the right thing for them and their patients.
How did you end up at Juniper?
Kind of on accident, like all good jobs. I knew it was time for me to make a move. And for anybody out there, I know the job market is challenging at times, and especially right now. And I had to get over myself around telling people, you know what, I think it's time for me to move on from this one thing I'm doing and on to something else. And so I finally, got over my own ego and started sending out messages to friends and saying hey, look, if you hear of anything, just No, I'm out there looking. And by pure chance, two different friends both knew Jeremy Grushko, who is our CEO and founder at Juniper. And they both independently told him I might be looking. And he reached out to me on LinkedIn, and I guess the rest is history.
That's awesome. 80 to 90% of good job searches come through networks and referrals. So that's the way to do it.
It really is. And, in some ways it's great for Jeremy, but it's also great for me. I have these people who know him and know the company. And so it's a nice way to vet a company as well.
When you first spoke to Jeremy about the product, based on your background, you must have been quite excited about what they were trying to achieve.
Yeah. And they had, I learned in the interview process they had just launched the website, but thankfully they had launched a website. I looked them up online and was really impressed with what they were trying to do in terms of trying to use science to make the journey of, having a baby a little faster and a little less painful. And they weren't really involved in things that I didn't believe the science was ready for yet. So there wasn't anything about, are we trying to pick the smartest baby or the baby who can play soccer the best? Or, we weren't doing anything like that. And so I was really impressed with just the pure focus on science and the pure focus on the patient experience of IVF, as opposed to, I think, maybe the more just sort of not data-driven experience that can be offered by other companies.
The designer baby, I hear a lot about designer baby, but I haven't. If I'm honest, I haven't taken the time to look into it too much. So I feel like there's rumors about what you can do these days, and I don't know if they're true. Myths would be a better word, but so this is not that. We're absolutely trying to improve the results of IVF for parents who really want to, or potential parents who really want to bring a child into the world, but are having problems doing that.
That's exactly right. Yes, really focused on IVF success and genetic disease, things that are well defined and supported in the literature. No designer babies, which is funny because every time I tell somebody that I'm a genetic counselor for 20 years, you tell somebody you're a genetic counselor at a cocktail party and they're like, oh, so do you make designer babies? Nope, that's not. And so the answer continues to be no.
Okay, good. Okay, we're on the same page. So where is IVF at the moment? Because what's the current state of play that needs improving, and therefore the Juniper science and product is gonna make that change?
Yeah. So if we focus specifically on the genetic testing aspect of IVF, historically, when IVF was, first invented, we didn't have a ton of genetic testing. And so you'd have your embryos and you'd look at them under the microscope, and we sort of joke it's this like embryo beauty contest. And you kind of pick the one that looks the nicest and you decide to transfer that one. But when you do that and you don't have any genetic testing, the likelihood that a woman will become pregnant and that there's a live birth is about 30 or 35%. And then over time, people realized, oh, you know what? Chromosome abnormalities are a large cause of miscarriages or failed implantation, or just kind of the lack of a positive pregnancy test in general. And so now it's pretty common. Over half of IVF cycles do something called PGTA, which is pre-implantation genetic testing for aneuploidy. So if I break that down in like the most basic terms, the analogy I often use is the following. So imagine every embryo is like a little bookshelf. And what we're doing with PGTA is we're looking at that bookshelf and we're just counting the number of books on the bookshelf. That's like counting the number of chromosomes. We want to make sure that every embryo has 46 chromosomes. If it doesn't have 46 chromosomes, probably not going to recommend that embryo for transfer. And that type of testing has been around, going on maybe 20 years. And it's great. It has improved outcomes. So if you look at PGTA tested embryos and the success rate, it's about 55% chance that transfer would be successful, which is great. That's an improvement over the 30 or 35%. But the problem is it's been stuck at that 50 or 55% for like a
Right.
decade.
Right.
So we know there's something else going on. And, because you're testing an embryo and there's such a small sample to work with, we haven't been able to bring what is common in other areas of genetics, which is more comprehensive sequencing, to reproductive medicine. But there have been some recent improvements in the technology that have allowed us to change that.
Mm.
So what we're doing at Juniper, we call it PGTG for like genomics. And what we're doing is go back to our bookshelf analogy. We have our 46 books on our bookshelf. Now we're going to take all those books off of the bookshelf. We're going to read them from cover to cover. And what we're looking for are any changes inside that book that cause genetic disease or that might affect the embryo's viability. And so we're adding that to the equation in terms of deciding which embryos to transfer. And our goal is to bring that transfer success rate from about 50 or 55%, a coin flip, up to 80 or 85%.
Wow. 85. That's such a significant improvement. And I think, like, for me, this is what I find fascinating about this. I've got friends who have done IVF 4 times, and
Yeah.
that's the reality of it. And um, it's so expensive,
Yes.
right? So there's not only are you at a place in life where you desire to create a family, and that is such a huge a huge part of your heart, and the relationship that we're ready for that next stage. You hit this barrier,
Yes.
and then there's a financial burden on top of that, all for a coin flip. This is really profound. So where are you as a company now then, and what stage are you at, and how are you sort of progressing, and I guess milestones that we've just come off the back of?
Yeah, so we just launched our test clinically back in April this year. So it is now available to clinicians and patients to help make these decisions. Juniper has raised a $4.6 million seed round from a number of investors and are using that to continue to provide these services in clinics and to grow our business. But so far, it's going really well, and patients and clinicians, I think, are happy to hear about how we're using this type of data to improve success. And patients in particular, I'm back to speaking to patients, which is awesome. I get to do that now partly as part of my job here at Juniper. And you mentioned the financial impact, which I think is important. It is not inexpensive to go through IVF. There's also this, deep emotional impact that patients are going through, not only because they've been trying to have a family and it's not going the way they wanted, but every time you do a transfer, you're hoping, you're waiting.
Yeah,
Um,
brutal.
it's brutal, yes. And then, in the worst case scenario, you perhaps get pregnant and miscarry, which is also brutal. So people have been through a lot. And so really trying to reduce that burden, I think is a worthy goal.
Wow. Where was Juniper? Where and why was Juniper founded? What was the founder's sort of vision and purpose for launching the company?
Yeah, so Jeremy actually wrote about doing whole genome sequencing of embryos back in, I think, like 2008, which long before it was actually feasible to do it, and had this idea and really, I think still has the idea, and he's right, that you have this moment in time in IVF where you have these embryos and you can know a lot about them. And he thought it was crazy that anybody would move forward without, doing some additional testing and kind of knowing as much as you can know about those embryos. And it wasn't until, like I said, there's the past couple of years that the technology moved forward in a way that, not only could we scientifically make that possible, but the cost, came down to a point where it's not inexpensive, but it makes a ton more sense. People aren't paying, $30,000 or anything to sequence an embryo.
Yeah, crazy. And So you guys now are testing in the clinic, and what does that then? How does that then evolve into sort of a fully commercialized product that's widely available?
So, one of the things that we need to do, and I think that is important in diagnostics in general, is really come to the table with evidence. Because it's one thing to have this story and really, want to change the industry, but it is another to come armed with data and to prove that you can. And so the first step that, kudos to Jeremy and the team that they did even before we launched was a lot of validation data. We had families that donated embryos to Juniper as part of a research study so that we could do the sequencing on them. We knew this test would work. We knew we could find these, what we call reduced viability variants in those embryos. What we need now, and what we're working to collect alongside the clinicians and families that are doing the testing, is real life clinical transfer data, right? So right now we know we can see things in embryos, but what we don't have is we don't know that when you actually transfer that embryo, what happens. And so that's the data that we're working to collect now. And I think will be really, really important as we continue to move forward is to prove out that, in fact, this makes your journey shorter. Right now, we have our best estimates, but we need that real life, real world data, I think, to take us to the next step. And again, we are working on collecting that right now.
Does this obviously you guys are bringing something new to the market? So once you get this out there, and obviously you're then going to want to sort of bring it everywhere. Is there then sort of further improvements in the world of IVF that are still there to be made? Because you're making such a significant step as step one. Is there other things that then need to be done to improve the sort of overall process of IVF that you guys are going to sort of look to tackle?
So the other thing that we are looking at is how do we go deeper with the testing that we're offering and kind of, get even a more complete picture. So we've talked a lot about whole genome sequencing, and a lot of that focuses on DNA, but we also want to be able to use the RNA to give us a more complete picture. Currently at Juniper, we use the RNA as sort of like a double check on our chromosome testing, which is great because you can, but it's not good for the embryo to biopsy it more than once. And so if you take one biopsy, that's really your one shot at getting any information. And so what we're able to do then is use both DNA and RNA as sort of like a double check on the same sample to be confident in our answer. But you can use RNA for a number of things. And so one of the other things we've been exploring is how do we improve, like when you see a variant in an embryo, sometimes you see things that are very clearly problematic. Maybe half of a gene is missing, right? Like half the book is missing. That's going to be a problem, right? You can usually kind of reason that that would be concerning and cause some issues in terms of viability. But sometimes we see really, really small changes, something like the word gray. And that could be spelled Grey, or it could be spelled Gray. How do we know if that makes any difference? And so sometimes what you can do is use RNA to help answer that question. So really getting better at understanding what we see in the data, I think, is something that would bring kind of the field forward. And then the other thing that we're really interested in, and we've talked to clinicians about, is how do we bring this testing maybe even earlier into the clinic? Right now, if you think about IVF and the process that occurs, what you're doing is you're telling most couples, if they're under 35, that try to get pregnant on your own for about a year. And if it doesn't work in a year, then maybe consider going to a fertility clinic and talking to somebody to see if they can figure out, what's going on. Well, great, but now you've already gone through a year, and you're a year older, and that's a problem because as women age, our eggs age with us, and there's an increased risk of chromosome abnormalities. Turns out, as men age, their sperm also ends up having additional mutations that can affect embryo viability as well. But, right, so now you've wasted a year. And so really the question is, can we bring any kind of testing earlier into the picture? So back to our carrier screening. It's funny how all these things kind of start coming together, right? If we think about carrier screening, right now what we do in carrier screening is we test for known genetic diseases. And depending on the company you use, that can be anywhere from about 200 to about 800 conditions. But they're known to cause genetic disease in babies that are born with those particular mutations. What we're seeing is you're not going to have a baby with a genetic disease if it has one of these reduced viability variants. In fact, you're probably going to have trouble getting pregnant. And so wouldn't it be great to know that earlier on? Could we use our data, because many of the variants we're seeing are in fact inherited, could we use our data to better screen and understand which couples maybe need to consider IVF earlier, or maybe different couples get more like a personalized recommendation? Hey, give it a try for 3 months, but given your genetics, if it's not happening after 3 or 6 months, you should be showing up in an infertility clinic. So I do think, right, there's an opportunity to not wait until people are having problems, but really use it in a more preventative setting.
Interesting. And then does the challenge become education, educating patients to want to go and seek testing early and stuff like that? Because ultimately that is an industry-wide diagnostics problem, right?
Yes.
Education.
Oh my gosh. Right. I did expanded carrier screening beginning in 2011. And people are still talking about how do we get expanded carrier screening into clinics? How do we grow this? And so, yes, there will obviously be a huge education challenge. I think some of the other problems, there are, depending on the diagnostic, and, IVF is certainly in this bucket, there's some argument over what are the things that you need to have versus the things that maybe you'd like to have. And that's an important distinction, because if your insurance company thinks you need it and guidelines think you need it, then it's more likely to be paid for and you might have better access and there's more education. If everybody just thinks it's optional, then, there are challenges getting doctors to talk about it because they don't want to talk about tests that are not covered by insurance or that patients won't have access to. And so then, it's a little more difficult to get the word out and get people tested.
Is IVF currently covered by insurance providers? Is that currently common?
It is not. There are 15 states that mandate coverage of IVF. Exactly what those laws look like, they're all very different. And so it's different depending on what they might actually cover or how many cycles they'll cover. The other key thing here is that some of those states, in fact, I think many of them, they might cover the IVF process, but they don't necessarily cover genetic testing. So you might, the cycles and the hormones and the egg retrievals and the transfer and all of that is very expensive. So that coverage alone is wonderful, but they're not necessarily covering kind of the comprehensive experience. The other thing that we're seeing more and more of, and I think is wonderful, are employers stepping up to the plate and saying, okay, my typical health insurer, Blue Cross, United Healthcare, whatever, maybe doesn't offer this, but now there are some specialty providers that do offer kind of this add-on coverage that employers are working with. So depending on the company you work for, you might have access to IVF coverage.
Interesting. With this, obviously patients, I'm sure, would love this, right? When you're talking to fertility clinics, are they equally as optimistic and desiring that you guys succeed and you can bring this into their clinics?
The ones we're working with obviously are, they wouldn't be working with us. But lessons I've learned in this industry over many years and still apply now are, the more you can, again, evidence matters. You got to have the evidence. You got to come with the data. And you have to be transparent about what you know, what you don't know. And so a really good example of that is when I meet with patients, when I meet with clinicians, and we talk about these reduced viability variants, I say, look, it might be tempting to see that on a report and say, well, then we're not going to use those at all. But the truth is we don't have all that data yet. And so we use the word reduced intentionally we do think these embryos have a lower likelihood of being successful, but I don't necessarily want you to discard them. So
Mm.
I think that's key, and being transparent about what we know and what we don't know is really important with both patients and clinicians. The second piece that I think is important is, you need to come to the table with ease of use in mind. If you are going to go into a clinic and think you're going to change their entire workflow for your new test, like, you have a surprise coming to you. You are not going to do that.
Yeah.
Or at least not until you have just like the world's best set of data and you're in guidelines. So that could happen too, but more likely you're not, typically launching with kind of that type of data in hand. And so you better come with a workflow that makes sense. In our case, what that means is the process that we use and the sample that we need from the embryo looks exactly like what they already do. So we're not asking them to change that. We're giving them a new kit. And so, instead of pulling one box off of their shelf, they pull a different box off the shelf. Everything else is taken care of. They don't have to worry about some new process that they have to follow in terms of the embryo biopsy. The other thing is we got a ton of feedback from clinicians like, hey, talking about all of this with my patients is a lot, right? It's taking a lot of time. And so how can you help me have that conversation with patients? And so we've developed, a number of educational materials, working on educational videos. And most importantly, and I'm entirely biased here, we have pre and post test counseling. Like, let us take that off of your plate, clinician, and make sure that your patients have the information they need to make a decision. So I think all of those pieces are really critical in thinking through, how you can actually achieve adoption inside a clinic.
It's really good to hear you talk about this stuff, because I think when dealing with early stage companies and maybe their founders, the love for their own science, the passion in their purpose can sometimes sort of mislead. And you sort of you believe you're about to make a huge change in the world, but what you don't appreciate is some physician somewhere who just doesn't want to change what they've done for the last 20, 30 years. And they're like, we're fine. This
Yep.
works for us. Why would we now sort of change this? I get the answers I need, or I'm happy with with what I've got. And it's great to hear that you guys at this stage are not only just thinking about it, but addressing it and creating, elements to the company that are all about education and support. Let's talk about the company for a second, because I mean, from the top of from the headlines, you guys have just raised a significant amount of money, which is in itself a really big milestone, because it's not easy to raise money at the moment. What do you think investors saw in Juniper in this tough landscape that makes them want to, take that bet on you?
I think it's a lot of what we talked about. Well, and I also, huge credit to Jeremy, who I think is not like any other CEO I have ever worked for, in the best way possible. Not that I didn't adore all my other CEOs, but he is different. And I think he really approaches the problem from a scientific point of view and a really like humble point of view. And he also comes to the table very transparently. And I think people feel that and know that. And I think the other most wonderful thing, him and I were joking that, I've worked at companies in my past where we have investors and we've had a lot of money, quite frankly, way more money than we have here at Juniper. And then when we go to the investors and need advice or need help, they're actually not that helpful. Like, they kind of yell at us and they're not providing any information. And these investors have been amazing. Like, we need help. And they're like, oh, let me introduce you to so-and-so who, can maybe get you the conversation you need to have. And so it's been wonderful. I think that Jeremy often says, like, you kind of find the investors you deserve. And so
Nice.
I think it's been great. I think he's found people who are like-minded and see what he sees and are willing to, place that bet on the science that we have and the approach that we're taking. Like I said, this very practical, like, collaborative approach, as opposed to there's a Silicon Valley, like, move fast and break things
Yeah.
mantra.
Yeah.
And that just doesn't work in healthcare. And so it's been really, I think, refreshing and fun to work with this team.
That's awesome. On that, I mean, this is important, right? You can have the best product in the world, and the biggest unmet need, but if the company isn't set up to be, a sound operation and hit its milestones and its its growth and hurdles it's got to come over, how are you guys set up from your perspective that gives you the belief that you guys are going to go on and do all these things that you want to do?
Yeah, one of the things, I think, kind of 2 points there. The first is that the company is really dedicated to hiring the best talent wherever it is. So we don't have a home office. I'm down here, outside of Houston. Our colleagues, or my colleagues, are all over the country. So really the goal is, like, how do we find the best person for the job that needs to be done and get them on board? We still meet quarterly. We're really my Slack channel, I had to turn it off because otherwise it will be like wildly dinging during this talk. And so we're well connected, but really, bringing that talent to the table is the first piece. The
Mm.
other piece is we are doing genetic diagnostic testing, and a lot of a lot of money in the past, I think appropriately, was spent on building a lab and buying sequencers and then having people work at that lab. So salaries associated with that and the real estate to put the lab in, like, all of those things cost a lot of money. And
Mm.
in past companies I've worked at, that mattered a lot. There really wasn't another choice. You had to build your own lab. But now sequencing has become, in many ways, a commodity. And so I think there's a huge opportunity right now to work, just like Juniper is, with other labs. We contract with a lab that does our sequencing. We
Mm.
bring all the special sauce to the table, but just like actually processing the sample, there's nothing magical about that.
Mm.
And so I think, it's been great for Juniper to work in that way. And I think it also will hopefully open up a lot more avenues for other companies to be able to be successful and bring new ideas into the space, because you don't have to build a lab from scratch to try out kind of these new ideas and then to get traction in the market.
I love that. It's about making smart business decisions, and even though you've raised money, you can't just go out and just spend it and capital expense and so forth. But I also love that you're interested in just getting the right person for the company, and it doesn't matter where they are, because you know that that person's quality, rather than someone who can sit next to you who isn't as good at the role, is just not going to produce the same results. So I think that's a really nice outlook on things. How big is the team now?
So we have 6 full-time employees. We're tiny,
Yeah.
but we have a number of people that we work with as well, because we have a Canadian grant as well. So we're
Mm.
partnered with a lab out of the University of Montreal, and so also have some help kind of coming out of there, especially in terms of some of the research that we're trying to bring to the table.
So I mean, you're proper start 6 people. That's
Oh yeah.
you're early. That's
Yes.
that.
When I said I wear a lot of hats, I was not joking.
Well, hopefully in 10 years' time, them 6 people, you'll have a special place in your heart forever.
Yes.
What should we look out for then from here on the horizon? For people that want to track the Juniper journey and are rooting for you, as people should be, because what I love about diagnostics is I think the industry should be all rooting for each other, and many do, but also the profound purpose and unmet needs that are trying to be met. This is one of them, isn't it? Everyone should be rooting for this. This is something that we should be seeing be brought to people who are at a stage in their life, like you said, the emotional drain and the financial drain and everything in between, that they really want this and they deserve it. What's the future look like, and what should we be looking out for to follow the Juniper journey?
So I think I think, just look for us to grow and become part of more clinics and hear a lot more about us. I'm anxious to see a competitor come out with like the actual same offering, right? Because that's when you're really onto a good idea.
Proves the thesis.
Yeah. So I know sometimes people worry about that, and I've heard some rumblings out there about like, oh, we're looking at something that sounds very much like what we're doing.
Cool.
So I think that's exciting, right? And then you kind of know that you're onto something.
Yeah.
The biggest concern I have for IVF in general, and I know, is a concern among many of the physicians, um, is just access. And really, we talked about insurance coverage with the states or with employers, but it's also just that, like all parts of healthcare, there aren't enough physicians, and so the best estimate is that we do about, I think it works out to about 450 cycles per physician per year. Um, and they should be doing maybe 4 times that. So there's a
Mm.
lot of people out there who could benefit from IVF and that can't get an appointment for whatever reason. And so
Mm.
we're hoping to maybe play a small role in fixing that, because the faster you can figure out which embryo to transfer and have somebody be successful at achieving their family, then the faster you can get the next patient in the door, instead of doing yet another cycle on the same couple.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're really hoping, to change that story, and I think there will be a lot of other changes in the market as well. But I hope that we are able to move the needle there.
What a lovely angle. Access, obviously, in North America, access to so many parts of healthcare is such a big challenge, and whether that's because of education or whether that's something it's geographical, and the fact that your product not only has the direct improvement in success, but actually that success means less cycles, therefore more patients, is an awesome byproduct of your actual, your first step goal. That's awesome. So I love that there's that access angle as well. Um Anything else you wanted to add, Kayleen? This has been really insightful.
I don't think so. If anybody out there is looking for me or looking for Juniper, we're at junipergenomics.com, or you can hit me up on LinkedIn. I obviously love to talk about this, so happy to do so anytime.
Lovely, Kayleen. That was absolutely awesome. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.